Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to go through this. And, um, it is now the second week of 2018, which just blows my mind. And here in North Carolina, if you're joining us from North Carolina, we're digging out of that very underwhelming snowpocalypse that we had last week. And in the coming weeks, I think as people get back to work and get back to routine, we're going to start to see an increase in interviewing and ultimately hiring. And while that's very exciting, it can also be really nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking for new grads or seasoned alumni who may or may not have interviewed or conducted a job search in quite some time. So there may be questions about the process and whether professional etiquette rules have changed over time. So today we're going to go through some important topics related to etiquette as it relates to looking for a job, as well as kind of navigating the office in your new position. For those who don't know me, my name is Catherine Tuttle. I am the career coach for the UNC General Alumni Association. This is my third year. Very excited to be back. And in general, a bit about my background. I have 10 years of experience within higher ed, working with MBA students at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, and with alumni of UNC Chapel Hill and NC State University. So hit all the major universities in the Triangle area, and like to think that I take an individualized approach to working with my clients. I really want to meet alumni where they are, understand what their goals are, and then help motivate them to reach them. We've got a smaller group today, so feel free to type questions throughout. You can type them into the chat box, or you can raise your hand, I believe. Marcy, is that an option today as well? And we can give them the mic.
Our last webinar did not allow the raise your hand. They've sort of changed the features this year, so I don't think that's feasible. But we definitely are looking. If you're someone who wants to ask a question live, instead of type it out, just type that you'd like to ask a question, and I can unmute you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for clarifying. Yes, but we'd love to take questions throughout. So just feel free to chat that in or chat Marcy if you would like to ask that live. So just doing your job in the current environment that we're in isn't enough, right? And the same concept applies to your job search as well. That traditional career ladder that we used to envision doesn't exist in a lot of industries. And because of that, people have the opportunity to move up and down and around in ways that they weren't able to 10 or even 5 years ago. But to do that, and to do that successfully, you have to stand out in a good way. You want others to see you as competent, as credible, and as a responsible and responsive individual. That means you have to connect with others in a genuine way, and you have to have a polished professional appearance. Your ability to get along with people, to exemplify good manners, and to make other people feel comfortable will likely be key to your success. In today's digital world and an environment where things can move very fast and we want it now, sometimes that means that business etiquette gets lost in the shuffle. And so today, what we're going to do is review some important areas where that etiquette can really mean the difference between landing that next job or moving up within an organization. So today we will cover the following topics. Professional etiquette does encompass a lot of topics, so I'm honing in here on ones that I get a lot of questions about when I'm talking to alumni. But again, of course, if you have questions about other topics, feel free to jump in, or we'll have time at the end as well. So we'll start with networking. In past webinars, we have talked a lot about the importance of networking. I talk to alumni a lot about this one-on-one. Building relationships with people, often fellow UNC alumni who are working in companies and positions you're interested in is going to be an important part of the job search. And while people get that logically, and they tend to understand that and appreciate that, they're often nervous about it, and that's natural. They're unsure about what they're supposed to say and how to say it, and they worry about how they're coming across to the target audience. So I thought it would be helpful to outline some key points related to outreach, and then we can move into kind of further into that process. So first and foremost, I want to be clear that when you're reaching out to alumni or other contacts, for networking or relationship building, the outreach really shouldn't be focused on getting a job. I mean, kind of imagine if you don't know someone, chances are you wouldn't take kindly to someone coming to you and asking about an opening at your company without taking time to build rapport first. So proper etiquette would dictate that you generalize your interest in that initial outreach and focus on asking for information, advice, or support. You are positioning that person as an expert in a certain area, and you're hoping to learn from their experience. So to that end, I would not attach a resume to that initial email. I get that question a lot. And what I hear from people that get an outreach message, even if it's written perfectly, but has a resume attached, is that it feels a little bit pushy. It feels disingenuous, a little bit presumptuous. So just leave the resume out of that first contact. They may very well ask for it, and in that case, certainly send it along, but don't kind of lead with that information. You also want to keep these emails, and I would suggest emailing to set up some time to talk. You want to keep these emails short and sweet. People are inundated with email. I think I just read something. We get about 150 emails a day that we're responding to, getting them sent back and forth. So you really want to keep things clear and concise. Let them know why you're making the connection and how you got connected with them. And please do not send a laundry list of questions for them to respond to over email. We do so much on our phones these days, and it's often the place that we're initially scanning an email message. So you want to make this really easy to read on an iPhone or an Android. And random tidbit for you today, a tip as to when to send these emails. The best response rates, and this is based on surveys by a number of different organizations. SurveyMonkey is one that I have kind of read through, and the best response rates are by far Tuesday and Wednesday. So if you think about it, Monday, we're coming back into the office and we're catching up on the things that we left on Friday that we weren't able to get to, and we're trying to get ready for the week. Friday, we're trying to get out of the office, so we're hectic. So think about sending them on Wednesday when they have that lull in the week. We're kind of a little bit more easily distracted. I've had a lot of alumni try this, and it actually works really, really well. So think about that when you're sending your outreach messages, and just, again, kind of be mindful of what other people have going on, and that Mondays and Fridays are not good days. And I always get asked for a sample, so I wanted to provide one here, and we'll talk through it. So Mr. Smith, please, please, please use a formal, personal address in the beginning. I'm a fellow UNC Chapel Hill alumnus, and I came across your information in the alumni directory. So you're being clear about where you came across their information. As someone interested in pursuing a career in marketing, I wondered if I might set up a 20 to 30-minute call with you to learn more about your career path. So we're being clear up front about what we're asking for, 20 to 30 minutes of their time, and we're asking for information. As a recent graduate, your insights into the industry and any advice you may have for someone looking to get their foot in the door would be so appreciated. So again, we're asking for advice, we're asking for information in terms of insights, Thank you for your time and consideration. I hope you have a great rest of the week. So again, that formal structure, but we're saying this very clearly and concisely so that someone understands exactly what you're looking for and how much time it will require. So feel free to take this and use it as kind of a template going forward, and you can adjust it based on what you are looking for from these connections. Whoop, I think I skipped a slide. So ultimately, when we're sending these messages, what we're trying to do is to set up as many phone calls and coffee meetings as we possibly can. If you've watched some of the previous webinars, we call these informational interviews, and they're a great way for you to build rapport with someone on a more personal level. Again, I hear this from people all the time. I know it is nerve-wracking to think about sitting down with somebody that you don't know and having to talk to somebody that you don't know. But the good news is that you really shouldn't be doing a lot of talking. You're going into these meetings with a list of questions and going in prepared to listen. Listening oftentimes is so much more important than talking when it comes to building rapport. So being an active listener, synthesizing, I'm having trouble getting that word out, synthesizing what it is that they're saying and asking good follow-up questions. And when you do that, you're respecting their time, you're showing a genuine interest, and you're building that relationship. If you can find common ground with someone, that is wonderful, and that may be related to your skills, it may be related to your interests, activities outside of school or work, or maybe even a love for UNC basketball. We just want to find things that you can connect with to build a stronger connection. And when you do that, ultimately what you're doing is you're building a network of advocates, so people who you can reach back out to and kind of leverage as you're applying for jobs within the industry or within that person's company. And while you should be doing more listening than talking, I do want you to go in, ready to quickly provide, an introduction to yourself, to your background, to your skill set and the areas of interest. This will not be kind of the focus of the conversation, and it certainly won't be at the beginning of the conversation, but oftentimes, during, when you get 20 minutes in, the person says, gosh, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd love to hear more about you. What are you looking for? What are you interested in? So having that, elevator speech ready and kind of practiced is going to be really important there. And the final question I would ask when you're talking to people, when you're wrapping up is there anyone else you think I should talk to, or resources that I should be leveraging in my job search? One, this gives you great information, perhaps a new connection that you can reach out to, but it also is a great reason to follow up with the person. And I often get asked, when do I follow up, or why do I follow up, or how do I follow up? If you ask for a suggestion at the end, it's a great reason to loop back with them in a little bit. Let them know, that you attended that American Marketing Association meeting, locally, and you learned something new about social media, and so appreciate the recommendation, and you hope to see them at a meeting in the future. Or thank you so much for the introduction to, Ms. Smith. We were able to set up a conversation. She also had some really interesting points to add to our conversation. I learned more about her industry and her career path. I so appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. That kind of thing. It's a great reason to loop back with people, with a purpose. Marcy, any questions on this section so far?
Not so far.
Okay, well, I am sure you will let me know people chat in. But in the meantime, we'll we'll move on because establishing rapport, is a key part of both informational interviewing, networking, but also being successful in your new role. People want to work with and do business with people that they feel like they know and feel like they can trust. So some tips for building rapport in a professional setting. One, when you're introducing yourself, always use your full name. Hello, so nice to meet you. John, my name is Catherine Tuttle. To give that professional impression. And when addressing others, try to pay attention to how they introduce themselves and or what they have on their name tag. So if you're at a networking event or a conference, people often have a name tag on. They tend to write the name that they go by. So use them by that name. Don't shorten someone's name or use a nickname until they give you permission. And if you don't know what they prefer to be called or can't remember, if it's possible, ask a colleague. And if no colleagues are around, or you're in a situation where you're talking to someone and you forget their name, just be honest about that. You can make it lighthearted and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I think my brain is consumed with this, big presentation to the CEO on Friday. Your name slipped my mind. Would you mind reminding me? I would rather you do that than get into a more awkward situation. I would also say that when you're at these types of events, at a conference, at a business meeting, at a party, whatever the case may be, common courtesy goes a really long way and is noted by those around you. So if you're in a situation where not everyone knows each other, it's proper etiquette to introduce new parties. Introduce everyone by name and then give a little bit of background on the person if there's somebody new to foster conversation. So, John, I want to introduce you to Sally. Sally just started as a marketing coordinator and recently moved here from Michigan. Oftentimes that little introduction sparks up a conversation. So John could then say, oh, wow, how are you liking being in North Carolina, or you must have gotten a kick out of how everything shut down last week when we got an inch of snow or something along those lines. So it's an easy way to kind of spark conversation. Another tip for people who get nervous in these types of situations, a lot of times we go to work meetings where there's food involved, it's a luncheon, it's something along those lines. If you walk in and get overwhelmed and don't know anyone, get in line for the food or drink and make eye contact and smile with the person next to you. Say something nice about your surroundings or the event. Or sit down at a table and turn to the people on either side of you and introduce yourself. To show a genuine interest in other people, and people notice that. This comes into play in job interviews a lot too. I have a friend who owns his own recruiting business, and when he is interviewing anyone, he purposely kind of leaves them in the waiting area for a few minutes, and then after the interview asks the receptionist what his or her thoughts were about that person, right? He wants to know that these candidates are showing respect for people across levels. And that often comes into play, especially in that final decision. What kind of impression did you make? Did you show an interest in the people around you? All of these interactions matter. And finally, I think most of us know this, but in the U.S., a common business introduction involves a handshake. That's our most common business greeting. So please, have a strong and steady handshake. People don't like kind of that limp hand. So grip the person's hand, shake firmly. Typically the higher ranking person puts their hand out first, but if they don't, the lower ranking person can. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That is proper etiquette. And these days, both men and women should stand when they're being introduced or greeting other people. So some of these kind of more traditional gender roles, have kind of disappeared in the workplace. So when you're being introduced or introducing someone, stand up and, look them in the eye and smile and give them a handshake. So I get it. Some people, just have this gift of gab and they can talk to anyone, anywhere with ease, and they love it and it energizes them. But for most people, or at least most of my clients, and even for me, it can be really nerve-wracking to meet people we don't know and to hold a conversation, but it's so, so crucial. So some tips, again, to kind of get you going in these situations. If you know who's going to be somewhere, whether it's a business meeting or a job interview, look them up on LinkedIn in advance and get to know a bit about their background. Prepare questions based on that. So, for example, if you go into a meeting or a job interview, you might say, I looked you up in preparation for our meeting today. I looked you up on LinkedIn and saw that you graduated from UNC as well. When's the last time you went back to campus, or have you been back to campus lately? Or I saw that you volunteered with the Boys and Girls Club. I used to do that. I've been meaning to get back into it. I'd love to hear more about your experience. Which group are you working with? That type of thing. So, people often wonder, am I going to come across as, a cyber stalker if I reference somebody's LinkedIn profile? But it's such a normal part of, our professional world now, and people look people up on LinkedIn all the time, and typically in advance of informational interviews and interviews, it's become a standard part of the process. So I wouldn't worry about that. Just be upfront about it. I looked you up on LinkedIn in preparation. Seems we have this thing in common, and go from there. It's perfectly normal. If you're going into an interview, I would certainly suggest, reading up on industry news and reading professional journals. This would also be good if you were going to a business meeting or a networking event. Certainly observe your surroundings on the way. So you might notice that there's a new building going up next door. You could ask about that. You could ask about, an upcoming event. The Winter Olympics are coming up. That's fair game, right? If everybody's interested in sports, you could certainly talk about sports. We really just want to avoid politics and religion, and the key is to stay positive. Again, we want all of these conversations to have a positive tone to them and nothing negative. So avoid closed-ended questions to keep the conversation going. So instead of saying, are you going on vacation this summer? Which is easy to say, well, yes or no. What are your vacation plans? Are you looking forward to visiting a new place? Or instead of, are you enjoying the new office space? What's been your favorite part about this beautiful new building? There must be so many amenities. Like questions like that give people the opportunity to elaborate. And then it's your job, again, to listen, to synthesize, and to ask good follow-up questions. Okay, thank yous. Thank you notes matter. They still matter. And we'll talk through when to send an email or handwritten. But when somebody does something above and beyond, it is nice to say thank you. And it's, of course, nicer if you can to send a handwritten thank you. But the key to these is that they have to be well-written and error-free, because a well-written thank you note will help you stand out in a good way. A poorly written thank you note will help you stand out in a bad way, and we don't want that. So be specific about what you're thanking them for and why, and, if applicable, kind of what it meant to you. So reasons to send a thank you: if you're being treated to a meal, if you receive a present, when somebody agrees to meet you for a informational interview, or interviewing for a job. All of those situations, etiquette would dictate we send a proper thank you note. The key to whether you send an email or a thank you or a handwritten thank you has a lot to do with kind of timing and urgency. So if it's an informational interview and you sit down with somebody or have a phone call with somebody for 20 or 30 minutes, there's no kind of immediate need for them to see a thank you. I think sending something handwritten in the mail is a very nice touch. If you are interviewing for a job, typically we want to send an email within 24 hours of that interview, because things, they don't often move fast, but sometimes they do move fast, especially towards the end. And so what we don't want to have happen is that you send a handwritten thank you note when the 3 other candidates send thank you emails and they make the decision, the next day, and you look like the person that hasn't followed proper professional etiquette. So again, if it's time sensitive, I would send an email, and you want to send individual thank you notes to everyone involved. So if you do a roundtable interview, or if you interview with, oftentimes they have you come in and interview with, 4 different people in 4 different, rooms or at 4 different times, then each of those 4 people would get their own thank you note. And we'd want to differentiate them in case they compare notes. So, Marcy, I'm going to keep going. I don't see anything in the chat.
No, you're good on this end too.
Okay.
Oh, wait, Catherine, we just had one pop in.
Okay.
And it says, when applying to multiple jobs, would this person notify each of the references of each position, and would he or she send a thank you to each reference regardless of progression within the process? Or do you only send a thank you if you get the position?
Okay. So I think I would, responding to the second question first, if you know that they are contacted and they actually have a conversation with someone in regards to a job, then I would certainly send a thank you. I always recommend that people, when you start a job search, identify and reach out to your recommenders and, let them know that you'd like for them to be your recommender, kind of fill them in on the types of roles that you're looking at, and just make sure you're on the same page so that they will serve as a recommender to you. I don't think you need to notify them of every job you apply for, but once you get into the interview process, when you get through a phone screen and maybe have that next interview, at that point it is a good idea, one, to ask the interviewer, about the timeline and the process, and then so you can hopefully give your recommender a heads up. But really it's further along in the process when you want to loop back with them, let them know that you are in the final rounds for XYZ position. Here's a bit about that job. Here's a bit about the skill set I've been highlighting. And that gives them something to go on and refreshes their memory so that if and when they get a call, they know what to talk about and they aren't caught off guard. And then certainly if they are contacted by the company and actually talk to someone, that would warrant a handwritten thank you or an email, kind of depending on your relationship with them and their preference. So hopefully that answered the question. Feel free to text in a follow-up or ask other questions. I mentioned on that last slide being treated to a meal, and that is often a part of the job interview process. It also comes into play, in professional settings all the time. And business meals oftentimes stress people out quite a bit. Try to keep in mind that the point of this type of setting really is to encourage socialization. It's not to make you nervous. It's a way for people to get to know you and a way for you to get to know people outside of a typical work setting. it often occurs after the more formal interview setting. So maybe you interview in a round table or interview in that kind of back-to-back setting, and then you all go to lunch type of thing. And the key here really is fit. It's, can you connect with your future coworkers or your boss? Can you hold a conversation? All of the tips and tricks that we've been talking about come into play here too, in terms of building rapport with those around you and things to talk about, that type of thing. The most important part point that I want to make here before we kind of get into place settings and all that stuff, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on that, but the most important point I want to talk about here is that while you may need to eat while you're at one of these meals, you need to keep in mind that you are not there for the food. A business meal or business interview over a meal is not about the food. So we're not going into that thinking, oh, this is great, I'm going to get really good free steak, right? That's not the point of this. You are there for business or for an interview. You are there to build relationships, to foster connections. I say this all the time, but people hire people. They don't hire resumes. They hire people that they believe can do the job and that they would want to work with. So knowing how to mingle with other people and navigate a meal will help you kind of relieve some of that worry, and also focus on the people and not so much, the fork that you're using or that type of thing. We'll put the place setting up in case people have questions about this. The bread plate and the kind of the bread and butter is typically on the right. Your meal, or on the left, excuse me, your meal is in the middle, and your water is on the right. If it helps, think of the acronym BMW. So left to right, bread, meal, water. So if the table is set properly, your bread or your salad or any other food dish will be placed to the left of your dinner plate, and similarly, drinks will be to the right. So any glass or drink that you have, whether it's wine or water or whatever the case may be, will be on the right side. Your fork will be on the left. If it helps you to remember, fork has 4 letters, left has 4 letters, and then your knife and spoon will be on the right. Right has 5 letters, knife and spoon have 5 letters. And we work our way from the outside in when it comes to utensils. So you start with the fork that is on the outside, that's your salad fork, so you use that when your salad comes, and when your dinner comes, use the dinner fork. When you're done with that course, you simply place that salad fork on the plate as a sign that you're done, and the waiter can take it away. Similarly, if you get soup, you start with the spoon on the outside and work your way in. So don't panic. I mean, I'm telling you all these things, but honestly, don't panic if you use the wrong utensil. When the course arrives and you need one, just ask the waiter for another one, politely and quietly. If someone uses your utensil, quietly ask the server for another one. When all else fails, if you go in and you forget all of this and you panic and you get nervous, just follow your host and do what the host does, right? If you don't know what to do, copy what the host is doing, and even if it's wrong, you will not appear wrong because you're copying the leader at the table. So I really don't want you to over-stress about this. Again, it's not about the fork, it's not about the knife, it's not about the food. It is about being able to hold conversation with people at the table. Again, most people are not going to fault you for using the wrong fork or passing the food in the wrong direction. If you're wondering, you pass the food to the right. But they will notice if you make some major faux pas, like getting drunk before dinner or talking with your mouth full, right? Husband recently shared a story. They took a candidate out to dinner and he had way too much to drink, and that was it, right? I mean, it just didn't show respect for the situation, for the host, and he certainly couldn't make logical conversation with that much alcohol in his system. So there are certain faux pas that I would like you to avoid. And in my mind, these are probably more important than whether or not you use the right utensil. Keep your cell phone off the table. That is number one. You can't connect with people when you have a phone out. Your attention should be at the people at the table. Don't chew gum. Don't groom yourself at the table. No fixing your lipstick or powdering your nose. If you need to blow your nose, go to the bathroom. Simple things like this matter. It's also really important not to complain or to criticize anything about the meal or the wait staff. That would be offensive to the host and their choice of restaurant. When it comes to kind of eating, when the food actually arrives, hopefully it all arrives together. If it doesn't, we wait until everyone has their meal, unless the host says, please go ahead and eat, in which case it's okay to go ahead. Don't order messy meals, and in general, order what you know how to eat and what you like to eat. It's not the setting to try new food, things that you may or may not like. Think about things that are sloppy or difficult to eat. So spaghetti, lobster, crabs where you have to break the shell. We want to avoid all of that. I would probably avoid sushi as well. It's really hard to eat gracefully, and oftentimes the rolls are very large, and then it's hard to hold a conversation. So keep it simple. Order something in the mid-price range. If you order the most expensive item, you certainly look like you're taking advantage of the host, and that's not what we want. And I would avoid specials because those often are the most expensive thing on the menu. That said, if your host recommends something and it tends to be, and it happens to be on the more expensive side, that would make it okay, but I would still probably recommend going with something in the mid-price range. And of course, limit your alcohol. I would suggest, if you are at a business meeting or an interview, no more than one drink. And if no one else at the table is drinking, I wouldn't order anything. So if the host orders a glass of wine, feel free to order a glass of wine, but nurse that glass of wine throughout the whole meal. We don't want to be seen as taking advantage of the situation, or risk, getting a little bit too tipsy. In terms of what to wear, we really want to project a professional image, and to a large extent, your professional image is based on your verbal and nonverbal communications, as well as your dress. So in terms of verbal communication, that's actually the words that you use, and this is including a lot of things that we've already talked about, like calling people by their preferred name, using your full name, speaking loudly enough for people to hear you, not getting too formal, saying hello instead of hey, when you're getting to know people, allowing others to speak, staying positive, and trying not to talk too fast. That often happens when we're nervous, so trying to tone that down. And then nonverbal would include your body language, the posture, eye contact, gestures, etc. Eye contact actually plays a really big role in the hiring process. And I was reading a career builder survey recently where hiring managers said more than 67% of the time that they would be less likely to hire someone who failed to make eye contact. And 38% were reluctant to give a job to someone who didn't smile. And 33% had a similar reaction to applicants who fidgeted too much. So just keep these things in mind as you are going through your interactions. And when you're thinking about dress, it's not just the clothes that you wear, it's also the fit of those clothes and the appropriateness of those clothes. for an interview, whether it's in an office or at a meal, I would always suggest a suit unless you are told otherwise. This has made a difference. I've had people told that, while they were a very compelling candidate, it came down to two people. And sometimes it comes down to people, one person wore a suit and one didn't. And that appears, that they were putting a little bit more time and effort in. So there are cases where people are told not to. My husband is in commercial construction, and they tell people, we're not in an environment where we wear a suit. Don't feel like you need to come in that manner. And, business professional in that case, or business casual, but you don't have to wear a suit. Otherwise, I would err on that side. And within an office, I think it's important to mirror those around you. So take cues from leadership. If your boss wears a suit every day, perhaps you should think about wearing a suit every day. Analyze the clothing choices of people who have the job that you want next, and dress for the job that you want. And just kind of keep that in mind, looking at what higher level professionals in your organization are wearing as a clue to what you should be wearing in the office. Marcy, any more questions?
No, I'm still doing well.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll keep going. These aren't as kind of in-depth as some of the others, but I did think in this environment, working remotely is more and more common, and there's some things to keep in mind when you're working remotely to make sure that you're keeping that professional image up and following proper etiquette. So the first thing, if you're working from home, I would say make sure you have a separate space for your office so that you're not getting distracted throughout the day by pets or children or whatever the case may be, anything that could interfere with your work. And I would always answer your phone or cell phone professionally. So again, you are still working. If someone calls your phone, saying, hello, Catherine Tuttle here, or, this is Catherine Tuttle with Forward Thinking Resumes and Careers. Thank you for calling. Something professional to make sure you're keeping that rapport up. I would also say, it's really important to keep in touch with other employees. So just because you're not physically there, we want to make sure that you're still having conversations, still keeping up with email. If Google Chat has become more common in office settings, if your office is on Google Chat, stay on there so you can be reachable. And oftentimes people, when working from home, one of the benefits is you can do laundry in between calls, or sometimes while you're on a call, but don't advertise that. We don't want to seem like we're taking advantage of these things. And finally, when you can, I would encourage you to have face-to-face interactions, making sure you're visible. If your office is if you're working for a company that's not located in Raleigh, or where you are currently, I totally understand that, right? But if your company is within driving distance, making the effort to go in for certain meetings is important. And certainly if there are kind of important business meetings or lunches or conferences or retreats, that would be worth kind of making the effort to get to those things. So again, there's tons of benefits, but we want to make sure that you're staying in touch with people so that you are not forgotten within the culture. Okay, just a couple more things. The first being, the digital office and conference calls and Skype. This, from an interview standpoint, almost all initial screens at this point are over the phone or via Skype, so we need to get comfortable with these settings. It's common practice for interviewing and other interactions with remote teams. So when you're on a conference call, it's important to speak up and to speak up early. And then when you do kind of jump in later in the conversation, say your name, because we don't always recognize everyone's voice. So, this is Catherine, and then, I can make my point, and make sure that, on conference calls, it can be particularly tricky because you're not having those visual cues. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes you have to interrupt because otherwise you're not going to be heard, but you really need to learn how to do that politely. Just say, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I want to address this one point before we move on, that type of thing, and not just kind of overriding other people. I think from an interview standpoint with Skype, the most important thing is that you get comfortable with the format. I know that a lot of people kind of have moved on from Skype. A lot of younger folks want to chat over Google Chat or, FaceTime, but oftentimes from a business standpoint, they want Skype. And so you need to kind of re-familiarize yourself with that format or acquaint yourself with that format. 5 minutes before the start of your interview is not the time to do that. I would practice with somebody, a few days before and just make sure everything's up and running. Make sure you have, a good internet connection where you are. Learn how to adjust the volume, kind of practice positioning your camera in different places so that you're really comfortable and that's not what you're worried about when you're going through the conversation. It's really important that you have a background that is not distracting. That comes into play from an inner office standpoint, but for interviews, it's really, really important. I talked to a hiring manager the other day who was telling me how he was interviewing a candidate over Skype, and they were kind of sitting in front of this bookshelf that was full of all these different books and textbooks, and he could not concentrate on what the person was saying because he was trying to read the spines of the books on the bookshelf. So make sure it's a clean, non-distracting background. It doesn't mean you have to be against a plain white wall, but make sure there's simple things behind you. And I don't know why, but I'm going to say the same. I've had way too many practice calls with people where they're in the bedroom. That's not the appropriate place to do a Skype interview or a Skype call either. So again, if you practice, you can make sure and get some feedback on the setting, on the lighting, on the volume, all those things so that you feel more comfortable. And your dress is going to be important. If you're working from home or if you're getting on a Skype call for an interview, you want to dress professionally. Again, a lot of times that has to do with not making you come across as somebody who is taking advantage of the situation. So make sure you're dressed professionally. Studies show working from home people are more productive when they put real clothes on. I mean, we can all joke about working in yoga pants and pajamas, but we actually are more productive when we put, professional clothes on and work. Just make sure you're controlling interruptions. So going into a Skype interview, again, put your cell phone away, make sure, put a note on the door, in a meeting, please do not ring the bell. If you have a landline, mute that ringer, all those things so that things stay as calm and consistent as possible. Just one more point here, and then I'm going to leave the last 10 minutes for questions. With email, a couple things regarding etiquette that I want to run through that are very, very important. Please double check that you've selected the right recipient. People send emails to the wrong people all the time, and it can be costly, especially when you're sharing something that's not work-related or politically motivated. Things that could really turn people off. I've seen it happen. It's not pretty. Be careful. Please make sure you're checking the recipient line. If you're worried about sending it to the wrong person or at the wrong time, write everything, proof it. If you're worried about tone, read it aloud to see how different words might be emphasized, and then add the person as the last piece of the puzzle, and double check that. Again, it's good practice to include a signature line if you don't already have one, with a name, phone number, and email, so that if somebody has a question, they can kind of easily loop back with you. And if you're in a job search, I cannot say this enough, make sure it is a professional email address, first name dot last name dot first name, first letter of your name, last name, whatever the case may be. Please don't have, your cute family email address or, Tar Heel fan at something. Make it easy for them to figure out and remember your email. And make sure that your Gmail photo is a professional one. I see this all the time. It's, you making a silly face, or you with your dog, or you at the beach. None of that is appropriate when you're looking for a job. Make sure it's the same as your LinkedIn profile or another, business professional picture. And with reply all, just think very carefully before you hit reply all. This is a big pet peeve of people, that they get looped in on messages or continually looped in on messages that aren't necessary. So if somebody sends an email to a group and you have a question specific to one person or want to clarify a point, write that person back separately and don't copy everyone in. If you do that too much, that is not proper business etiquette, and people will get frustrated with you. Yes.
Hey, Catherine.
Yeah.
Before you move to your next slide, I just want to add a thing to think about in terms of email, and it's something that everyone I know, self-included, is guilty of doing, which is recognize that even in a virtual environment or in an office setting, that everything should not be over email, in the sense that it is always so easy to send a quick email, but sometimes those emails that you spend too much time drafting are probably better said in a conversation. Which means that, like, if you, analyze and you're not sure about the tone and you're not sure about this, then it probably means you shouldn't send it in an email. And you should probably stop and say, hey, do you have a few minutes to chat on the phone or in person? Because so much can be misconstrued in terms of tone and tact and everything else over email, that those are the times to just have a conversation with someone.
Exactly. And if you need an immediate response, you might want to think about calling the person, because one of the complaints that I get very often from people is, this person sends me an email and then a minute later comes to my office to ask me if they saw my email. If you need an immediate response, call the person on the phone or drop by their office, kind of depending on their preferences. So yes, another good point, Marcy. If you're analyzing it too much, you probably don't need to put it in writing and just talk to the person. And this is a quick point, but just keep in mind that things can be shared even if we have privacy, screens put up, and we're careful about who we're friending on Facebook and who's following us on Twitter and all those things. Social media has made the world so small. If you are in a job search, I would recommend being really careful about your profile picture, about the things that you're posting, and even in a professional environment, just be aware that your professional image is not just what you do when you're around people in person or working with them. People do go to your social media, so make sure that is reiterating the impression that you're putting forth, and that you want to maintain in the workplace. A couple resources for you, a couple books that I think are helpful if you have questions about these topics. So Kiss Bow or Shake Hands is a book about kind of etiquette in other countries. So if you are traveling for work, or if you are interviewing in another country, for a job in another country, this is a really great resource for you, just to make sure, in this international environment where we, are working with global clients, that you're interacting with people in a way that builds rapport across cultures. And then the other book I would recommend that goes into a lot of what we talked about today in more detail and many more other topics is The Essentials of Business Etiquette by Barbara Patcher, and she's a very famous speaker on this topic. So both, if you have questions, are great. But I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes and answer questions if people have them. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up this slide here. If you would like to schedule your complimentary coaching session, just email Marcy, and I'm happy to work with you all one-on-one and use that hour however you would find, whatever you would find most helpful.
And in addition to your coaching session, I've just put a link in the chat box that just shows where all of Catherine's previous webinars can be found. If you haven't had a chance to check those out, you can go there and just log in. So again, as Catherine said, we'll be on the line a couple more minutes. Thank you again for your GAA membership, and we look forward to you having a great 2018.
Thanks, Marcy.
And if you're a slow typer and have a question, just feel free to type "I have a question" in the box, and I can unmute you as well.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're at closing time, so thanks so much. Hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again, Catherine.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks, everybody, for joining.